Yeah, we have more and more science showing that holding the limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise is a real climate planetary boundary. And what does that mean? Well, it means that go beyond it and we risk crossing several tipping points of large biophysical systems that we all depend on for our human well-being, prosperity, equity, and development. And among these systems that are at risk if we pass 1.5, we have the Greenland ice sheet, we have the West Antarctic ice shelf. Can you imagine? Combine these two across the tipping points so that they irreversibly melt would take us to in the order of 10 meters of sea level rise. It will take centuries, but it would be unstoppable. We include all the tropical coral reef systems in the world, the risk of losing permafrost and thawing permafrost up in Siberia, in the Arctic, and even pushing the Barents Sea thermohaline circulation across the tipping point. So these are big systems at risk already at 1.5. So I call 1.5 today a planetary boundary. It's a limit we don't want to exceed. We want to work everything we can to hold that limit. And we are today at 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius. So we're coming very close to 1.5. That is why it's so urgent to now start bending the curves of emissions so that we can have, as science now is clear, a decarbonized net zero world economy by 2050 in less than 30 years' time. Yeah, the social and economic consequences already today at 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius of global warming are starting to really hurt societies, economies around the entire world. The rising frequency of droughts, heat waves, floods, fires, disease patterns. We have just gone through one more terrible summer of droughts and heat waves and fires in Europe. We have the devastating floods in Pakistan, the starvation in the Horn of Africa, terrible droughts in the western part of the US, affecting farmers, communities, economies, now around the entire world. If we go all the way to 1.5 and past that point even, so you'll start seeing even more severe extreme events, but also the risks of irreversibly committing all future generations to rapidly rising sea levels, but also less and less livable conditions. This will of course hit all economies in the world, but particularly the most vulnerable communities. We're talking about, for example, in the next 50 years, you could have 3 billion people living in the tropical regions in the world, so developing country regions predominantly today, where you have average temperatures that are beyond even the health limits of what we can cope with as human beings. Of course, this is an enormous, social impact, but also a risk of displacement, social instability, even conflicts if we would push the global warming so far. So we have everything to gain from moving very fast to avoid those socioeconomic impacts.
The chances of staying below 1.5 don't look at all good. But worse than that, the real issue is the avoidance of the major tipping points. And the first of the tipping points has now actually tipped. And the reason is, this is the Arctic Circle region. And over the last 20 years, the Arctic Circle region has been heating up at 4 times the rate of the rest of the planet, which means that the Arctic Circle is now 3 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. So when we look at the Arctic Circle, the tipping point there means loss of ice over the Arctic Ocean. And as you lose the ice, blue sea is exposed. Ice reflects sunlight back into space, blue sea soaks it up. And so over those 3 months, the ice disappears very quickly. But ice is again formed over the ocean during the polar winter, but it's a thin layer. So as soon as the sun comes back, it disappears and we get this heating up. And the result of the heating up is, first of all, Greenland now sits in that blue sea during the polar summer. It's now losing its ice, and I use this word carefully, irreversibly, leading eventually to 6.5 meters sea level rise. If we look at the permafrost regions in the land around the ocean, because the North Pole is roughly in the middle of the ocean, those regions contain a vast amount of methane, and methane is a much more serious greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. When all of that methane is emitted, let's suppose it was emitted in 20 years, over a period of 20 years, and it's now being emitted quite rapidly, global temperatures will rise by 5 to 8 degrees centigrade. So the combination of these events means that what's happening in the Arctic Circle impacts on the whole planet. So if we pass a tipping point, it means we have to change our terminology. I don't believe we any longer can simply believe that reducing emissions deeply and rapidly is enough. Yes, we have to do that. We should do it much more quickly, because every ton of greenhouse gases we put up now, we've got to remove again. So going forward, what's a safe future for humanity? Today we're well over 500 parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Pre-industrial age 275. A safe future less than 350. We've got to take out a vast amount of the greenhouse gases that we put up there largely through burning coal, oil and gas. So there's a whole set of challenges that we need to accept. Yes, we need to do all that, but at the same time, and this is the piece that most people are startled by, we also need to refreeze the Arctic, because if we don't do that, we'll all be cooked before we've done the others.